Welcome to Sailing in the Mediterranean and Beyond podcast. I'm your host. My name is Franz. Well, it's been a really long time since I've done a podcast. I'm not going to make any apologies. It's just been a busy life for me right now. But I do have a report to make on probably my final sail in my own boat, which was from Puerto Rico up to the Bahamas, and then through the Bahamas, and then over to Florida, where I put the boat up on the hard in Indiantown, Florida, in the marina at Indiantown, Florida, and then listed my boat for sale at that point in time. So I'm just going to give you an update on this year's sail. I headed over to the boat. I departed Salt Lake on Monday, January 13th, and en route to San Juan, Puerto Rico. I arrived there at the next day, basically in the morning. It's an overnight flight. You know, one of the things that I used to think when I got my boat to the Caribbean is that it was going to be easy to get there and back. And in hindsight, it is so much easier to fly to any destination in Europe and go sailing in the Mediterranean than it is for me from Salt Lake to fly to anywhere in the Caribbean. If I'm flying anywhere in the Caribbean, I'm going to have to do 2 or 3 stops. I'm going to have to usually spend a night somewhere, and in reality, it takes longer and is more expensive than flying to basically about any destination I want to go to in the Mediterranean. So that was a false assumption on my part when I decided to go sail in the Caribbean. The Caribbean seems to be much more expensive for getting down there from Utah than it would be for me to get to pretty much anywhere in Europe. There's direct flights from Salt Lake to Paris, Salt Lake to the Netherlands, and a few other places. So once I'm in Europe, it's just a hop from wherever I land to get to whatever destination I'm going to. So it's much easier for me in Salt Lake City to fly to Europe and go sailing than it is to fly to the Caribbean and go sailing. So that's a big surprise. Now, if you live in Florida, it's probably easy for you to get down to the Caribbean. But for anybody in the western United States, you may as well just fly over to Europe and go sailing in the Mediterranean. That, and in my opinion, it's much more interesting. I haven't changed my opinion on that. I was really surprised how much I missed the Mediterranean after I spent about a week in Grenada. I was ready to go back almost immediately. And then last year, after sailing all the way from Trinidad up to Puerto Rico, it just reinforced my opinion that sailing, or I should say traveling, is much more pleasant in the Mediterranean than it is in the Caribbean. Now, the actual sailing, is wonderful in the Caribbean, at least on the Windward Islands. You're doing the trade wind sailing, and whether you're going north or south, it's pretty much on a tight reach either direction. And it's just wonderful sailing. Now, my experience once I got up to Puerto Rico was I had to watch the weather a lot more carefully than I did when I was in the Windward Islands. The Windward Islands seemed to be pretty much consistent weather day to day to day to day because of the trade winds. But once I got to Puerto Rico, it was affected by the weather patterns off North America. So I arrived in Puerto Rico, and I had an Airbnb for a couple nights down at Fajardo. That's where the boat was at Safe Harbor Fajardo in Fajardo. A wonderful marina and an expensive marina, but very well protected. My boat did not have any problems. There were no hurricanes that hit there this year, so really no problems except for a little bit of, not really mold, but just some sort of a scum that built up on the inside of my boat that I took basically water and vinegar and wiped it down with, and it was fine. I had originally planned on my friend Ed from Chicago, who I've done the Chicago to Mackinac race with several times, to join me, and then one other new crew member, Ben from Norway, Bendik Olsen from Norway. But I got a call from Ed a couple weeks before the trip started, and Ed said that they had found that his wife had pancreatic cancer and they were going to be dealing with that. And I wish him the best. I hope it works out well. And he would not be able to come. So as it was, Bendik, who I'd never met before, I met him through the web. He was from Norway, a young man in his 30s, early 30s, and he'd only been sailing a couple times before, but he was really anxious to learn how to sail. And I'll be quite honest, I'm 71 years old now, and it's getting harder and harder for me to move around on the boat, particularly in the engine room where I'm crawling around. And of course, I had my back surgery a year ago, so my back is not the best for twisting and turning and doing all the strange movements that you have to do to get in my engine compartment and do any work on it. But he was more than willing to do everything, and he was anxious to learn everything. So I just started talking him through everything we needed to do to get the boat in the water. I talked him how to take off the saltwater pump and change the impeller and put that back on. I taught him how to tighten up the stuffing box. We put up the sails together. He was a great student, and he was anxious to learn, and he's always welcome to come sailing with me again on the boat. And so it was just him and I for the long haul, the 5-day overnight trip from Fajardo, Puerto Rico to Inagua, Bahamas. So we left, and it was a pretty windy day when we left Puerto del Rey in a safe harbor. That's the name of it, Safe Harbor, Fajardo, Puerto del Rey. And so we headed north, basically motoring against the wind. And, well, not really against the wind, but the wind was too tight to sail it. The wind was from the northeast. And so we turned the corner, put up the sails, basically put up the jib only, not the mainsail, just the jib only, and had pretty much a downwind run all the way. We were possibly going to bail out at San Juan if the conditions were too rough, and they were pretty rough, but they weren't too rough, so we just kept going. And so we had 4 hours on and 4 hours off for our watches for five days, basically, until we arrived at Inagua and cleared customs into the Bahamas. Now, I've been to customs in a lot of different places all over the world with my boat. And I will say the customs officer at Matthewtown, Bahamas was the most friendly, delightful customs officer I've ever met. He helped me fill out the online form, which was quite honestly a pain in the butt. And he corrected a few items I put on there for me, and he was just delightful. He met me right at the harbor. So I went into the harbor at Matthewtown, tied up on the side wall, and went into the harbor master's office and made a call to the customs office, and it was around $120 to clear in. So it wasn't cheap, but they were certainly pleasant. And also, when we pulled into Inagua, there was a woman that met us at the harbor, at the dock, and said, "I'm here to help you. If there's anything you need, let me know." And I said, "Well, yeah, I need to get a SIM card." And she said, "Well, let me call somebody to get you a SIM card." And she got somebody down that worked for one of the local companies or one of the SIM companies in the Bahamas, and I got a SIM card, paid for a SIM card. And then I said, "We're hungry. Where can we go to lunch?" She said, "Well, it's a long ways from here. Let me call up a restaurant and make sure that they have a room for us." And I said, "Great, how do we get there?" And she said, "Well, just hop in my car. I'll drive you down there." And she did, and we went to this restaurant, and there was no sign on the restaurant as to it being a restaurant. And we went in, and we were the only customers. We had a nice meal. I bought her a meal as well. And she was just delightful. And I said, "How much do I owe you?" Because I thought, well, she's giving us this service. I should pay her something. She said, "You don't owe me anything. I'm doing this. I'm paid by the government to welcome people into our island and take them around." So she gave us a little mini tour and took us down to where the salt ponds were. The main employer on this island was Morton Salt Company. that had drying ponds there for years and years and years. And they were the biggest employer on the island, producing sea salt. So we looked at the weather once we got there, and like I said, it was 5 days, day and night, day and night. And when we got there, the day we got there, it was dead calm. And that's why I felt pretty comfortable going into this tiny little harbor under power and tying up there, because there was literally no wind. At the harbor, when I got into Matthew Town, there were 2 boats there, really derelict-looking boats from Haiti that had tied up to the seawall. And apparently they go back and forth between Inagua, Bahamas, and Haiti, trading a little bit. And it didn't look like they were going anywhere anytime soon. They were waiting for the weather patterns to be favorable for them to head back down to Haiti. We did not go into the Dominican Republic or Haiti. We just went straight by them. So it was a straight shot from Puerto Rico to Inagua, the Bahamas. So we were looking at the weather, and it was calling for very, very strong winds in 2 days from the north. So we would be basically stuck there. I was, at this point in time, pushing the envelope for getting my wife down to meet me in Georgetown, Exuma. And so we said, well, let's just get going right now. And so we did 2 more days to get from Inagua, motoring all the time, from Inagua up to Exuma. And we came into the Laguna Exuma, unfortunately, in the middle of the night. So I had to be careful about coming in. I was very careful on coming in because it's a unknown harbor for me. And coming in the dark is always nerve-wracking. Thank goodness we have pinpoint navigation with GPS now. But we got in there probably about 3 in the morning, dropped our anchor over where the other 317 boats are anchored, just off of Georgetown. And even though there were 317 boats, I know that because I did an actual count while I was there. There still was plenty of room to anchor. It's a big, big anchorage. I think it's called Elizabeth Island, which is just to the northeast of Georgetown. So it's a very protected anchorage. The prevailing winds are from the northeast, or the north, well, pretty much the northeast is where the prevailing winds are from as a general rule. And so you're pretty well protected all the way through there. So we got into, and this is after 2 solid days of motoring to get here. And then Ben left me here and flew on to somewhere to meet a friend, and then he was heading on to Cuba. He was basically taking a year off to travel around the world. He'd sold his businesses. He had a couple bars in Norway that he sold, and he was out learning about things and traveling around. And I haven't really heard from him since he left, but I told him he's always welcome to go sailing with me again if I do go sailing. So this is the interesting thing I found about in Exuma. Georgetown, Exuma is a wonderful spot for restocking. There's a huge anchorage just to the northeast of Georgetown where, again, while I was there, they did a survey and there were 317 boats on this particular day. Every morning they have a morning net on VHF, I think channel 68. It starts at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they welcome new boats in and wish the boats that are leaving good sailing and bring everybody up to date on any news and any activities that are going on in the anchorage. It's very close to a place called Chill and Chat Beach, which seems to be the activity center for all the cruisers that go there. Most of these sailors have big dinghies with big engines, and they get around pretty fast in there. And a lot of people get in their boats, sail from Florida, and a lot from Canada, go down here, drop their anchor, and never move for 2 or 3 months. That's where they just stay. Actually, probably 2 months, because I think the visa that you get when you clear in is good for 3 months, so they may have to get another extension if they stay longer than 3 months. But they just go here, drop their anchors. They might go out for a day or two, but they come back here, drop their anchor, and this is basically where they live for the winter. Not a bad place. And having been there for basically about a week, it's delightful. Now, right across from the anchorages over on the island of Exuma, there's a big dinghy dock with fresh, purified water on the dock where you can fill up your water containers. And right across from that is another diesel supplier, basically a gas station that's put a pump right down to the dinghy dock, right close to where the dinghy dock is for the main dinghy dock. So there's 2 dinghy docks there. There's one for gasoline or diesel or gasoline, and then there's another one to go and tie up and do whatever else you need to do. Right at the top of the dinghy dock is a very nice supermarket, and the supermarket is who supplies the water to the dinghy dock. You can get most everything you need at Exuma. I needed to get, I need to get some fuel, some diesel, because I hadn't filled up any diesel since I left Puerto Rico. And there was a man that provides a service, and he would fill up some containers with diesel and drive right out to your boat, tie up to your boat, and pump it into your boat. I had him do that for me. The delivery fee for doing that was $30. But the alternative was to go basically about 12 to 13 miles north to go into another marina and fill up fuel there. And it was just easier to pay the delivery fuel to get the fuel that I needed on my boat. Now, that wasn't quite enough fuel for me, so I took a couple 5-gallon containers over with me in the dinghy and filled those up at the fuel dock on Exuma, on the Exuma markets. So my wife joined me. We spent really only about one night there because the wind started coming up very strong from the southeast, and that is open to the southeast. It started getting really choppy. We decided, well, we have to go north and northwest anyway, so we decided just to pull up anchor and start heading north. The plan was for her to get off in Marsh Harbor on Abaco, so we had quite a ways to go to get to the end of the trip. So we started working our way north through the Exuma chain and then up to, we didn't quite get into Nassau. We anchored at an island just to the east of Nassau. I didn't want to go into Nassau. It just seemed like a busy place to go. So we anchored near Rose Island, which is just to the east of Nassau, and got up about 3 a.m. and started working our way north. Basically, it was a motor all the way north to Abaco. During that period of time, I lost circulation on my pump. We were sailing mostly, but I had the engine on, and I was starting to lose circulation. And I did lose circulation earlier that year, but I just turned the engine off and turned it back on, and it seemed to be okay. So while we were on our way up to Abaco, I lost circulation again. I shut off the engine, and we just sailed for a while. I let the engine cool down a little bit, and I closed the seacock and took off the water pump and put on another one. I had 3 extra water pumps on the boat, and so I put on another one and took this one apart. And some of the fins on the impeller, 2 of the fins on the impeller had broken off. Now, I had changed this impeller earlier in the year. I always keep spare impellers on the boat, and as you know, I keep spare water pumps on the boat too. So I hurried and replaced the water pump with another water pump that I had ready to go, and dissected the old water pump, and I just changed that impeller, and it was bad. So I guess what I learned from this is don't store impellers on your boat. They just deteriorate just sitting there. The rubber apparently just deteriorates sitting there. In the future, I will buy an impeller before I go and replace it when I get there, but I'm not going to store impellers on the boat. Or If you do, don't plan on using them for more than a year or so because the rubber just disintegrates sitting there. Because I'd already had Ben replace the impeller when we were getting the boat ready to go sailing, and that impeller was defective or became defective. It was fine when we put it on, but obviously the rubber was old. So my wife and I sailed around the Abacos for a few days before she left. You could really see the damage from the hurricanes that hit this. Hurricane Dorian came through and did tremendous damage to the Abacos. I think it was 90, I'm not sure exactly when it was, but you could still see a lot of damage from the hurricane that still had never been recovered. We went over and anchored off Hopetown and took the dinghy into Hopetown, which is on one of the offline islands, Elbow Cay, or Elbow Key, I guess it is. And this is a delightful little town. It reminded me a lot like Balboa Island in California. Just quaint little shops and nice little houses, and we rented a golf cart and drove all over the island. We'd also anchored farther south earlier down by Tulu Key before. Actually, no, it wasn't Tulu Key. It was down by the southern end of the island at Tahiti Beach. And so we'd anchored there and gone ashore, and then up here in Hopetown, we rented a golf cart and drove all the way down there again and drove all around the island. It was fun, but after a couple hours, there was really nowhere to go, and the golf cart cost $60 to rent for however long you did it. So it was expensive just to rent a golf cart and drive around. I got stuck twice. So I ran aground just to the north of Pigs Beach, which is near Thunderball Grotto. I'm looking for the name of this island, and I don't see it when I'm zooming in and out of here. But it's famous. There's pigs that come down to the beach and will come out and beg for food from you, and they're pretty aggressive. I ran aground just to the north of Pigs Beach near Foul Key Resort, and there's a cut you have to motor through to get down to this anchorage just to the west of Pigs Beach. And I ran aground. Fortunately, two sailors or two different dinghies came over and helped me get off. One of them took the halyard from the top of my mast and a line on it and tipped the boat over by powering over on directly perpendicular to the boat so the keel swings up. And then the other boat pushed me beam on away from the sandbar, and I was able to get off, and then they directed me through the cut. And then I anchored just to the west of Pigs Beach. That was the first time I ran aground. The second time I ran aground was when I was going into Marsh Harbor, and I took the wrong turn. There's a marked channel for big boats, and you're not supposed to, as sailors, we don't want to go in on that channel. And there's an unmarked channel for sailboats. And I took the wrong turn and basically changed my mind midway and tried to get from one side to the other side and ran aground. In this case, fortunately, the tide came up fast enough so I could motor off of it. Again, this is the first time I've had to deal with tides since I sailed up in the Northwest. I never had to deal with tides in the Mediterranean. So tides were actually my friend in that particular instance because I ran aground. It was sort of a soft mud with a few rocks, so I scraped a little bit of bottom paint off my boat, but no real damage there. Marsh Harbor's got a lot of room for anchoring, and they've got a good grocery store there to restock up. But I stayed at a marina for one night, and one night at the marina was, I think, around $140 for my boat, so it's not cheap. You can anchor for free, but if you need to tie up at the marina's very expensive by my standards. My final crew joined me in Abaco and Marsh Harbor, and we had basically a couple days to get from Marsh Harbor around the south end of Abaco and then straight over to Freeport, and we tied up at a marina in Freeport. I think it's just called Freeport Marina. And that was reasonably priced. It wasn't overpriced for where we're staying. We had to wait there for the weather to change. The next hop was going to be from there over to, and so we were waiting for a weather window so we would not be crossing the Gulf Stream with wind coming from the north. And we had to stay there for a while for the wind to switch from the north to the east. And so we had an overnight sail when we finally left there. We were probably 3 nights. Yeah, in fact, that's exactly what we were. We were 3 nights at this marina, and then we left there and sailed all the way over and cleared customs at Palm Beach. There's a cut into the inland waterway at Palm Beach. We got in there in the middle of the night, and as we were approaching, we were stopped by a customs boat, probably about 5 miles away from Florida. He just asked us a couple questions: where we're coming from, where we're going, and I told him. And then you use the Roam app to clear customs in the United States. And so once I got within cell signal of the United States, I put my old SIM card in, my U.S. SIM card, and got on the Roam app. And the first time I did this was when I cleared customs into Puerto Rico from British Virgin Islands. And somebody actually came on and did a video interview with me. And I was expecting to have to do that, but I got on the Roam app, did everything, and was waiting for a response. They never responded. Finally, I went to bed that night. In the morning, I got a note. I was cleared to go into the United States. I was cleared. I didn't have to talk to anybody, didn't have to do anything. And my guess is, since I'd been stopped by a customs boat offshore, that they had already reported I was coming in, and that pretty much took care of it. There were 3 of us on the boat at that point in time: Mike Epperson, my nephew, and another crew member, Todd Gailey from Chicago. And we had planned on coming in farther north at St. Lucia Inlet, but because of the weather, we decided we better get across as fast as we could, and that was the closest in miles from Freeport that we could get to. And it turned out to be a good choice, because we came into Palm Beach, we anchored there, got a night's sleep, and then started motoring up the inland waterway, and that was a delight. Motoring up the inland waterway from Palm Beach up to St. Lucia Inlet was a lot of fun. So we motored all day long up through the inlet. Beautiful, huge mansions lining the inland waterway on both sides. Big boats, lots of traffic. And then we anchored just before Palm City that night. And then the next day we went into the Okeechobee Waterway. I'm not sure what it's called. Basically the canal that goes from the east side to the west side of Florida. You can take a boat all the way from the east side of Florida to the west side of Florida. You come out by Fort Myers and you go in at basically St. Lucia Inlet. And we had to go through one lock. It raised us up about 13 feet. And then we motored on into Indiantown. And that's where I was pulled out of the water and put on the hard. Now, my observation of Indiantown Marina, it's a new low point for me in marinas. It's where boats go to die. It's got so many boats in there that have been in there for who knows how long, and they're just falling apart. There was a power boat across from where my boat is sitting, and there was literally a tree growing out from the inside of the power boat. There's lots of boats in there. They had an auction for 30 boats. While I was there, they did not get a bid on any of the boats except for one boat. Somebody bid $1,000 for it. They are just deteriorating. I think people have come in there, put their boats in there, died or forgot about them and never paid their marina fees, and finally they start putting them up for auction and going through the process of getting title to be able to get them out of there. But there are so many derelict boats in this marina. It's unbelievable. They do have a great center for the sailors to go prepare food. There's a kitchen there. There's a refrigerator there. There's a stove there. There's a barbecue there. a couple toilets and a shower, just one shower for everybody there. And there's quite a few people that live on board their boats there. You're not supposed to live on board your boat on the hard. You're only supposed to be able to stay on your boat for a couple days if you're on the hard. But there are quite a few people that live there on their boats year-round, and did not look like an enticing lifestyle to me. But there's no water where my boat's at. There's no electricity where my boat's at. They would not even provide me a ladder to get up to my boat once it was chalked up. I had to go borrow a ladder from somebody else. But I was underwhelmed with the marina itself, the boatyard itself. The marina was fine, but the boatyard, I've never been one as derelict as this one is anywhere in the world. But anyway, that's where I am until I go back and either put my boat back in the water and go sailing again, or ideally I'm going to be selling my boat, and then that's it. I'll be sailing on other people's boats for a change. I'm getting too old to maintain the boat in the condition I like it, and at this point in time it's best to go ahead and sell the boat. I would give it to my daughters if they wanted it, but that's not something that's not their dream. This was my dream, not their dream. But my daughters, when I put the boat up and they knew that this was my final my final sail, flew from Utah down to help me put the boat up and basically say goodbye to the boat. The boat was a big part of their childhood. They started sailing on the boat when they were probably 4 or 5 years old and sailed on it all through the Mediterranean, and it was a big part of their life. And it felt like the loss of a good friend when I finally put it up for sale. Now, if you want to find out about the boat, you can go to my website, medsailor.com, and there's a link that describes the boat, and also there's the information on the boat broker that has it up for sale. And the broker is Dave Waters Yachts in Florida, and you can make arrangements with him if you want to go. If you are interested and want to go look at the boat, you can make arrangements with him. The actual broker is Derek Jarvis, and his cell number is 954-683-6047. And the office number is 954-527-0664. So, at this point in time, I have to decide what to do with this podcast. I've been doing this since 2013. And I think what I'm going to be doing is I'm either going to turn this into more of a commercial website and talk about chartering, and I'm going to go back specifically to the Mediterranean. I really have no desire to talk about the Caribbean anymore. The highlight of my sailing experiences has been in the Mediterranean, and the 1 year I spent sailing in the Caribbean was a big disappointment to me. And so I'm going to back to concentrate on sailing in the Mediterranean. And I'm trying to figure out how I can actually monetize this website. I've got a great domain name, medsailor.com. I'm sure I could sell that just by itself, but I'd like to start doing something where I can monetize the website, maybe arrange charters or talk to specific charter companies and getting more information from charter companies, since it looks to me like the only time I'm going to be sailing in the future is either on somebody else's boat or chartering a boat myself. So I want to learn more about that, get to know the charter companies, and share that information with you. Or if I have a specific guest that I think would be interesting to talk to. Now, my next podcast is going to be an interview with Matt Bracken, who's written a bunch of books that I really enjoy. They're sort of on the lam, sailing books, and also just good adventure books. And he's going to be my next podcast guest. I hope to interview him this week sometime. But if you have specific guests that you think I would enjoy talking to and sharing that information with our listeners, write me, franz1@medsailor.com, and let me know about him. There's been several of you that had suggested people that I talk to, and I have reached out to those people, and I never hear back from them. So don't think that I've ever ignored your suggestions. I always follow up on those, but quite often I don't get a response from the other end, and so it sort of drops there. But if you have some suggestions for guests that I should talk to or interview for this podcast, reach out to me again, franz1@medsailor.com. And that's pretty much it for probably my final sail on my own boat. Life is short. In the end, all that really matters is the memories you make. So make a few. Go sailing.